what's interesting is that I find myself as part of the Great Resignation, which is kind of interesting. But what I've really noticed is that people from underrepresented groups are more comfortable with flexible work environments. And there tends to be, from the dominant culture, a push to come back and be in the office because that's a comfort level to the prevailing culture. And so I think where organizations are really going to need to do things differently is understand that part of the adaptation, part of this growth, this change that needs to happen is, like you said, a redefinition, a renegotiation of how work gets done.
Interesting. Jayla, I know you have strong opinions about this. And so I would really love, and I know that you are generationally different than Holly and me. So might have a different take on it also from a generational point of view as a person who's like at an earlier stage in your career, thinking about what does this mean for you and what are some of the things that you think about as far as your own career trajectory, as far as how you want to be employed and the nature of the kind of employment relationships that are palatable to you.
Yeah, I can speak from this just like on my experience and also like what I've picked up from my peers. But so I'm Gen Z, I'm an elder Gen Z, I'm the first year, and we entered the workforce as COVID hit. Like a lot of us were getting into our first like career-oriented jobs at that time. So I think that's a big factor where we got established when we're working from home and not necessarily in these traditional workplace structures. So that's one push why I think there's a big reluctance from like more people in my age group to like go back. And then another reason too, I think, is COVID changed everybody, but it allowed us time to slow down and sit at home and like be still enough to really think about, we had a conversation about like work that's meaningful. And I think a lot of people decided that like the jobs that they were doing or the careers or pursuits or paths they're leading weren't actually like giving a lot of meaning to them. And I think that's like a big thing that's changed. A lot of people want to find purpose, find flow in what they do. And then also there's this other like aspect of being just appreciated and feeling like the work that you do is not only impacting others, but you're valued for it.
Right.
And I think people are like, me, a lot of feeling a sense of, I want to be in a workplace that if I'm not just another number, I'm not just this role, like I have a good holistic like work-life balance and I'm appreciated for my character and not just how productive I've been.
Yeah. It's so interesting to think about that because I wonder like, and I don't know this, but are people more productive when they're working from home? Do we have a sense of that? And I'm not pushing one way or another, but I'm wondering because culturally speaking, at least in the United States, we care a lot about productivity, right? And we try to measure it. And it's been really complicated to figure out like, how is it that we help ourselves understand what drives productivity? And is it being at home and having more flexibility, or is it being in a workplace environment where you're actually able to have some of the creative and synergistic exchange and making sure that people have access to tools and resources and support that you might not have if you're at home and your computer crashes, or if you need to get something signed or a decision made quickly. So I wonder about the question of productivity as we kind of navigate through this different landscape.
I think that's, and at least from what I'm perceiving, I think you guys might have a different perspective, is that the more holistic approach to work, like we have more language too. Like we talk about emotional well-being and mental health. Like that's language that I feel like is more incorporated now post-COVID than it was like previous too. So people are having emphasis on different aspects of their life that's not like productivity. And then others, I saw on my flight here, actually, I sat next to a man and he's saying that he's on his way to Colombia. And he's like, being able to like get up and take a break and go travel and go find creativity and find other outlets to do things has made his work life better. So he's like, when I go back to work, I don't feel drained. I don't feel like stressed. I feel relaxed. I get inspiration. So there's a give and take, but I think that's something a lot of people are finding value in that they weren't finding in like traditional offices or sitting at their desk. Like if I get stuck on an idea, I can literally change locations. I can go work outside. I can go another place. And sometimes that's just like, that's all people are looking for.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's completely true. I think it absolutely reflects the experience of, what companies are trying to figure out. So
Right.
at the company I was last at, we did a survey asking people what types of work do you feel that you're better in the office, and what types of work do you feel like you'd be better at home? And what was very interesting is there was, from leadership, a real focus on, but we need culture. We need people to be together. We need this feeling of who we are as a company. And I think, what's interesting is people who started during COVID and who never actually met people physically still felt like they had a sense of culture, because culture isn't necessarily just being in person. On the other hand, there are types of work where people feel like it's brainstorming. Right. So in a marketing services company, the idea was, if we're going to be brainstorming and putting ideas on the wall, being together does make a difference.
Yeah.
And it results in quality work. On the other hand, there are times when, if I'm just going to answer emails, if I need to really be thinking and focusing, it's better for me to be at home.
Yeah.
And I think the big challenge is, how do you structure it so that it works for everybody in all of this flexibility, right? And one of the things I noticed is, you've probably seen that new little tagline that's coming on people's emails. This email is sent at a time convenient for me. Don't presume that it's convenient for you. So there's a little bit more to that. And it's interesting to see how it's going to evolve.
Yeah, and I'm speaking as someone, the first community I found and ever felt a part of was online. Like, that's a big difference.
Yeah.
So it's easy for to virtually find that when that's what you're used to, that's what we grew up in, that's what we've already been adapted to. And I think that could be a disconnect to people who are used to finding online digital communities versus the in-person experience.
Okay, so this may be generational, I don't know, but it's interesting to me to imagine that there's no connection at all between people saying, I just am not feeling the support. I'm not feeling heard. I don't feel like I have ways for my voice or my contributions to be fully acknowledged, or to kind of make their way through decision-making channels, and also being in a totally virtual space. Because a lot of times it feels like in totally virtual spaces, we're just kind of here for this meeting. The actual stuff in between doesn't really happen, right? It's like, okay, here's the meeting from this time to this time. If anything, we're making the meeting shorter or more efficient and more topically focused. But all the stuff that is the in-between stuff that allows people to get to know each other and establish a sense of care at human levels is harder, it seems like. And I don't mean people need to leave the workforce for that, or if it's a hybrid versus in-person issue, but it does seem like all of these things are kind of conflated. And I wonder if the meaning that people are seeking from their work, some of it has to do with not being able to actually establish some of the in-person relationships that might actually be cultivated more in an in-person environment. I don't know.
Interesting.
That is a good point. I think that you said earlier that you found more marginalized identities are more reluctant to return to the workplace.
Yeah.
And I still remember, I had 1 and a half year when I was in a traditional office setting. And I remember feeling kind of awkward and tense there. And I know the feeling people are talking about, the gathering around coffee and being able to speak and build those relationships. And I understand why that's a big draw, but also me being, again, one of the only Black women in that organization, I couldn't connect 100% with everyone that way, at least not as easily. And that's another thing that virtually, it's easier to maintain those work boundaries. And so you don't also feel like I'm being left out of this culture.
Yeah.
Right? When it's okay, I just all focus on the work and what we do and building a relationship through that.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it can cut both ways, right? I mean, if the in-office culture is such that it actually leans towards exclusion, if the water cooler conversations feel exclusive, then you could see how the virtual would be preferable.
And the dialogue around that started around George Floyd and all that caught our culture really focusing in on this happened when we weren't really returning to office settings. So while I think that a lot of organizations are making the moves and steps and impacts to change their inclusion in that culture, people that didn't get to experience that before they left might not believe it or might not be eager to return.